If you use Cinema 4D or you've even heard of it, then I'm sure you've heard of Cinema 4D's Mograph menu and how great and powerful it can be, but easy to use. Hi guys, welcome, it's Kobe here, and in this video we are going to talk about Cinema 4D's Mograph. In this video we are going to try to explain almost everything under Cinema 4D's Mograph menu, and even try to explain what each parameter does for whatever object that we select from the Mograph. So it's going to be a very long one, so I've decided probably we'll break it down into series. So without wasting time, let's get into Cinema 4D. I'm using Cinema 4D R25 here, but everything I'm going to talk about will apply in previous versions of Cinema 4D, probably except from R19 downwards. The Mograph menu contains sets of generators, couple of deformers and effectors. And how it works is we basically use the generators or the deformers on any of your objects, and now use the effectors to control the generators or that the Mograph menu provides. So let's quickly get into it. So we are starting with cloner object. So that's the first object in here. So we choose cloner. We have matrix, fracture, all of them. We'll talk about all of those things, but we are starting with cloner object. So I'll select cloner object and nothing happens. And what the cloner object does is it basically takes any object that you give to it and produces lots of clones of it, like its name says, cloner. So I'll simply come and create a normal object. I'll create, let's say, a normal cube. I'll make it a little bit smaller, so I'll make it, scale it down. And to generate clones from the clone object, you need to make the object a child of the clone. And now you can see instantly it gives us 9 different clones. So now let's select the cloner object and see what's happening, the reason why it's giving us all these copies and why it's giving us these copies in this way and all of those things. So with the clone selected, if we come down to the its attributes manager, you can see the information down here about the clone. So now the first thing is mode. So the mode is a grid, and in the grid, if you come down to count, you can see it's giving us 3 by 1 by 3. So 3 on the X, 3 on the Z, and on the Y it's just 1. So if I should increase this by and go to 2, you can see now going upwards, we have 2 going upwards. So basically this is the basic information about what the clone is doing. We have other modes as well. So we have linear, which will go up by that. We have radial, which will give us radial. I can open the radius. We have the grid, which we did the first, honeycomb, which is very good for making stuff like brick and all of those things. And we have another one, which is object. We'll talk about the object a bit later. So let me go back to the grid. Now, mind you, depending on the mode selected, the parameters down here changes. Now you see it's set to grid, but if I should change it to, let's say, linear, you can see the parameters changes. So you have to keep it in mind. But these things, let me actually set back to grid again. Those basic parameters are things that if like you should get, so everything I talk in the grid here, you can also manipulate it there. There's not so much difference, but there are slight difference and stuff, but you can easily play around to see what they do, how well they all work. So with the grid down here, there are other things that we want to talk about. I'll for now ignore these ones and come down. So this is where you control the number of the counts of your copies. So you can see all of these. So now the spacing tool, if you want to space, like this is where you actually use to space your object, you know how you want to space it, and you can find this in the other parameters as well. It all has like something similar which you can use to control your spacing and everything, if depending on what you have selected as well. We have the modes. You can see that down here we have modes, per step and endpoint, and that this can be very helpful. For instance, this is how you want the size of your clones to be, right? But you want to fill in between. And if you can see for now, if I increase it, you see it keeps opening up and everything. But if I should set it to the endpoint in here, everything that I create will now fall within the size that has been created already. So this can be very helpful sometimes when you have everything set already and you want to fill it. So this is how the end and the per step works. When you come down here, we have form, and this can be used in along with, so for instance, with the sphere, let me change it from sphere, and you can see it's trying to take a shape of a sphere. So if I should increase the count in here, you can see it's trying to take the shape of a sphere, basically. With a cylinder, the same thing. Try to take a shape of an object. It means you have to define it with an object as well. But this is different from the object menu that we are going to talk about. So these are the basic stuff about like the grid array or the clonal object. If you come down here, we have play mode, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So now let's go back to the object menu and see what the object menu does. There's a lot that can be done in there. That's why I actually separated it from this whole thing. So now let's go to the object menu. So with the object mode, it means you need an object to define where your clones should be. So if I come in here, I'll create a normal cube, right? And now let me actually delete this. I want to use spheres. So I'll actually come in here and I'll create a sphere. You can't see it because it's within this, so I'll make it a bit smaller in here. Then I'll bring back my cube. All these doesn't matter. So now we want to clone the spheres, make it several copies of the sphere. If I put it into the cloner, you can see we don't see anything because we've not defined the object we want to clone the spheres on. So now if I come down to the attribute manager, I can see in here we have this space object here. So it means you have to drag our object in here. So I'll check the bring back our cube and I'll drag it into our object space here, and you can see now it's giving us some other attributes as well. So we can also explain all those things later. So what it's doing is now it's now cloning the spheres on the cube, and it's cloning on the surface of the cube, right? So it's just randomly creating several objects, and it's creating 20 copies. So if you come down here, you can see the count 20 copies. I can increase it, the number of copies I want. You can change the seed, and that will change how it's cloning on the object. You can even use selection. So if I had like a selection of this sphere, I can actually restrict it to that particular selection, the part I've selected as well. All right, and now down here the distribution, we can change it. So now it's set to surface, that's anywhere on the surface of the cube. We can change it to edge, so now you can see it cloning to the edges of the cube. You can change it to polygon center, so now you can see it cloning just in the center of every polygon. You can also change it to vertex as well, and you can see it's at every point where there is every vertex, that is where it's cloning onto. And you can also do volume, that is in the center, or fill the volume of the cube. So that one too, you can increase it as much as you want, and you try to fill the volume of the cube, but because the spheres are big, it's popping up, and you can see. So these are the basic controls that you have with the cube. So I'll bring it back to the vertex, and now you can see we have our object created here. Also notice that anytime I change the distribution, so right now it's set to vertex, and you can see we have like some parameters down here. If I should change it to, let's say, edge, you can see now the parameters down here also changes as well. So when you change the distribution, some couple of things change. So for instance, with the edge, now I have offset, which I can offset to which part of the edge that I want. And there's this one thing, scale to fit edge. So if, for instance, I had something like a cube, you can actually scale it to fit edge, so that it will scale to fit the length of the edge of the object. So depending on the distribution, the object parameters also is changing. So you can see now it's set to surface, and that attribute is gone. So this is basically how the object mode works. But what happens if we use spline to define our object mode? So we can also use spline as well. So now let me go in here, and I'll create a helix. I'll create a normal helix spline. I'll change the axis, right? And now let me, instead of using the cube as our object, I'm now going to use the helix. So I'll drag the helix to the object space to replace the cube, and now I can actually delete the cube. So you can see right now it's cloning. If you come down here, you can see it's cloning the count of 10. So it's cloning 10 objects on the splines. We can actually restrict it as well to just the vertex of, so every vertex there will be a clone on every vertex and all of that. So let me bring it back down to count, and you can actually even it. So now the spacing between every clone will be even. But let me bring it back to count. And now with the count, we can also increase the number of counts in here. With even the even as well, we can also increase the number of counts as well. But you can see with this one, it gives us some different attributes down here. So we have offset down here, which we can actually offset where the clones. We have offset variation, so now you can actually vary the way it offsets each every clone, and the start to finish. So now you can see where we want it to start. So the clone, instead of starting all the way from the down of this helix, you can see it's starting from somewhere up here down here. And the same thing, you can actually make it end. So now it ends up here. So basically we have this control, but there's another one which we come down, we have read. And what does is, if I should increase the rate to, like, let's say 30 and hit play, you can see it gives it an animation, automatic animation without we keyframing or doing anything. We can vary the rate, and now I can see the movement and stuff is a bit different. Some move faster, some move slower, and everything. So using spline, it can give you some extra control and some interesting stuff that you can actually do using the spline as well. Now let me come back up here to explain what this parameter does. So to explain these parameters, I'll actually use a different scene. So I'll come in here, I've created a different scene, which you can see we have different objects. So torus, cone, sphere, and the cube in here. So I'll come and create a normal clone object, clone object. I'll drag and make all of this a child of the clone object, and you can see it's giving us multiple copies of all of them. But this one will be properly explained if I use the linear. So actually let me change it to linear so that we get what we are saying. So let me set everything to 0, and now we don't have any clones. Now watch what happens. You can see the arrangement here. We have torus, cone, sphere, and a cube, and you can see the color blue, all of those things, right? So if I should increase the count to 1, you can see the first copy that it gives me is the torus, which is the first one. If I increase it to 2, you can see the next is the second one. If I increase it to 3, the next is the sphere, which is the yellow one. The 4, you can see the green. Now if I should increase it to 5, we have only 4 objects, but if I should increase it to 5, you can see now it starts again from the torus, which is the blue, and now it goes back to the same thing. If I again start from the torus. So basically that's what it's doing. If you come down here to the iteration, you can see the clone iterate. So it starts from the first, second, goes through, and if it ends, now it starts again. That's how it basically works. That's what the iterate does. So if I should change it to random, like its name says, it randomly picks any object and gives us the number of clues. So it doesn't consider whatever. So you can see we have 3 greens, 3 yellow, 2, but just 1 cone and everything. It doesn't consider. So you can actually come down here where we have seed, and now you can continue to change the seed to see if you can get something that you want, and each seed gives you something completely different, right? The next thing is the blend, but the blend wouldn't help us to see properly with the blend. So actually let me create a different, actually let me drag this out. I'll hide this for now, and now with the blend I'll create same copies of the torus. So this one I'll make it a bit bigger so that you see the difference. So I'll increase the ring, and now like, let's see, so these are the difference with the torus. So you can see one is small and one is like open. Actually let me open it a bit more so you can see the torus. This is what we have. So now let me go ahead and create Mograph, a clonal object. Then I'll drag the 2 in here, right? I'll set it back to linear again so that we see it clearly. So you can see like iteration. So it clones the small one first. Now it comes back to this one. Because it's done, it's gone back to the clone, the small one again. So if I should increase it, you can see it iterates through it like that. But now we want to send it to blend, and what the blend does is, so let me actually change it. Blends the parameters because it has similar parameters and everything. It blends the parameters. So if I should change it to blend, you can see now, if I should select torus, you can see it's what it's doing is it's blending through these parameters, the ring radius, right? So it starts from all the way from 21.4, and now it gradually grows into the top one, which is 245. So that's what basically the blend does. It blends the object. So the more I grow, so the topmost object will always be the last one, as in the last proper size, and the first one will always be the small size, and the in between will always blend. So if I should reduce it, you can see now the size will always be down like the same thing. So if you want it open wide, then it means you have to select this one, and you can see it's when you open it, now it's blending through. If because it has similar parameters, everything that I change, in fact, let me actually change the display. Here you can see the counting here, ring radius. If I should reduce it, you can see because it has similar parameters, it tries to blend through. So here we have smooth, and as it gets up, it begins to get jagged and everything. So that's what basically the blend also does. Mind you, this doesn't work with only parametric objects. So actually, let me delete this torus. I'll create, let's say, a cube, right? And I'll make it editable. I'll click this one to make it editable, or you can press C to make it editable, right? And let me actually change the point. So you can see with this one, I can actually, let me move the point. Let me, in fact, duplicate it so that you get two different copies. So with the second one, I move the point out, like, so that I get different, like a bit of distortion in here, right? And I'll make the two a child of the clone, and you can see what's happening. It's now trying to blend. Let me actually, I can even make the cube smaller. So I'll select the two, or in fact, I'll select this one, change the transform, and I'll bring it back to object mode. Now you can see I make the cube. So you can see, even though it's two parametric, like editable object, but it's trying to blend from the small one to this bigger one as well. It affects several objects, not just parametric as well. And it works well when the object has similar attributes or similar properties and everything. I'll delete this, and the next we have, I'll bring back this old scene. The next we have is the sort, and the sort basically it works with alongside with effectors. We've not gotten to effectors yet, but like I can actually demonstrate. So I'll increase the count of the clones. Yeah, so I'll increase it to, like, let's say 20. It doesn't matter. So the sort works with effectors, right? So now we can see we have several different objects, right? I'm actually going to come to Mograph effector, and I'm going to use plane, right? And now if I, with the plane in here, I come to the parameters, and I come down to modify clones. If I should set it to, the more you see, whenever I change it from, it gets to 25, and it changes to the cone, you can see 50, it will change to sphere, and 75, it will change to the cube. So it's going through that. So we set it to 100, and now we can come to the field, use a fall off to the modify or sort it the way we want it. So I can now change it, like, to, let's say, use plane, right? And I'll change the direction to like positive y. And now let me move the plane. You can see now, see what's happening. So it's sorting through the object, the clones. So wherever the fall off passes, then it begins to sort through it. So we can actually use something like several deformers, different, like shader, random, and everything, and it will affect, sort it the way we want it. And actually, let me use random for us to see. So I'll come to random, the same thing, use the random effector, come to parameters, and now can modify clones. So we can limit, if we restrict it to just let's say 75, then it means nothing of the green, no matter what we do, the cube will never show. It will sort between just the sphere, cone, and the torus. And if I restrict it back to let's say 50, right, no matter what we do, this thing will never show. The sphere and the cube would never show. So if we set it to 100, then it means everything will show. And now we can actually use the random to randomly sort the object. So the sort works along with other effectors before it can actually see its power. So next we will talk about this parameter here, which is fixed texture. So I have a normal cube in this clone which have multiple copies, and it's set to grid array rate count on 11 and 7 on the Y, right? So I'm going to go ahead and apply a material to it. So if I apply this material, you can see each clone or each copy has its own separate material, but I want it to affect it as one big material. So I'll change it from UV projection. When I come to select the material tag and I come to projection tag, set UV mapping. So I'll change it from UV mapping to flat, right? So what it's doing, it's projecting one flat object over the whole clones, right? So if I should scale it, I'll make sure I've selected the texture mode so that I can scale it. So I'll scale it, right, and I'll scale it in here as well so that it'll fit. Now everything looks fine till I try to, for instance, do something the individual clones. So if I come here to the transform, so now there's one thing I need to explain whilst we are here. So when we have the clone, we have this coordinate. This one controls the whole clone as one object. So if you can see, if I rotate it here and everything, it rotates the whole clone. But if I come to the transform controls each individual clone, so its rotation, scale, and position for each individual clone. So for instance, if I should rotate, you can see it's rotating each individual clone. But what we are seeing is that the texture stays the same. So like the cube like slides through it, and the texture doesn't move with every clone. But that's not what we want. We want it to move like it's stuck to every clone. So that's where this fixed texture comes in. So now instead it's set to off, but we can simply set it to straight. And now if you go back to the transform and we would rotate it, you can see now it's moving with all of the clones. So for instance, let me actually use a random to Mograph effector random, and I can see randomly it's moving the cube different directions, but the texture is stuck with the every cube where it was formed, basically. So that's what the fixed texture or is it the straight does. The alternate x and y does something similar, but that applies to when you are working with, like, let's say a flat object with back and front like object. When you flip it, sometimes you get a bit of the wrong direction, so you can use the alternate x and y to fix the textures back. So that's basically what the fixed texture does here. Like this, with this reset coordinate, let me actually quickly explain that one as well. It's nothing fancy. So for instance, let me actually set it back to linear, right? And we have 3 cubes in here. I'll actually increase the height. So we have 3 cubes in here, and you can see whatever we do to the position of the cube, nothing happens. So let me actually select this one, and now whatever we do to the position of the cube, we cannot actually see. Let me also make sure I've selected the object mode. It's now set to texture mode. So whenever you use the texture mode, you should not forget to set it back to object mode or model mode, because if you don't take that, you probably move your texture. So whenever with the cube selected, even if I move when it's in the clone, nothing happens, right? It's still set to the clone. No matter what I do, nothing will happen. But if I should come to the clone, right, and now take off reset coordinates, and now whatever I move the clone, now you see you move the position of wherever I move the cube, you move the position of the clone. The restrict coordinates can make sense in some situations. So there are times that you have your object in a position that you like, you want to clone it, and you want the clone to stay exactly where your object is, but immediately you make it a child of the clone, you can see it moves it. Let me actually set it to linear so that you can see it moves it to the position of where the clone is, and now you wish you have to move the clone and everything, but this is where the reset. So if you uncheck the reset coordinates, now you can see it clones at where the object position is. Now it's animation and cloner. So there are some times that you have object which is already animated. So for instance, this cube is animated moving up and down like that, right? And I want to make multiple copies of it. So like I'll come in here, create a normal clonal object, and I'll make it a child of the clonal object, right? I can actually make more copies. Let's say right, and let me spread it a little bit so that we see what's going on. So it's the same cube animating up and down. Let me actually uncheck and play the animation for us to see. So if I hit play, you can see this is the animation that's happening. Just cube going up, and that's all. Goes up and it stops. Right now, if you clone it and we hit play, you can see it's not going up and stopping like the way we did it did initially. It's only just the scratch and stretch which is working, but the cube itself is not moving. So that is where the reset coordinates that I talked about comes in handy. So if I uncheck it and I hit play again, you can see now the whole thing is moving up and coming down. Let's go again. It moves up and come down. So that's one thing that the reset coordinate does very well. If not, you can also, for instance, put it in a null object. So I can create a null object, all right, and I'll put it in a null object, and now I can check back my this thing, clone, and I'll put back the reset coordinates, and now it will still work. I don't have to uncheck the reset coordinates. It can still work when it's in a null object. So that's one way around it. But then if you come to the clonal object, and you can see down here we have animation, all right, and in the animation we have it's set animation mode. It's set to play, so it's playing whatever animation we have, but we can also set it to loop, and now whenever the animation ends, so you can see where it ends at frame 334. If it ends, it will play again, and it begins to loop the animation for us. So the clone does the looping of the animation for us without we even doing anything. But there are other modes as well. So now with that mode we have fix, and let's play fix to see what happens. You can see with the fix nothing happens. Then with the fix, it means we can actually control it with effector. So you have loop, play, and the fix. The fix, you can control it with effector. So I'll go ahead and create a normal plane effector. So I'll make sure the clone is selected, come to Mograph effector, and I'll choose plane. And now with the plane selected, I'll come to, first of all, come to effector, parameters actually. Then you see we have the transform, color, and everything. But now what you are looking is the others. So the parameters down here we have time offset. So if I should start increasing the time offset, you can see it's playing the animation the way it was. So I'll increase it to, like, let's say, what was the animation? So animation was like 34. So let me set it to 34, 35. Even it's fine. Now if I should hit play, still nothing happens, right? It's set to just the frame 35. That means we have to actually control it with a fall off. So now if I should bring in a linear fall off, right, you can see wherever the fall off passes, the animation begins to play. So I'll actually open the linear fall off, and now if I go back, see what's happening. It's playing the animation whilst I'm moving the linear fall off, right? See what's happening. So that's one thing the fix also does very well. So basically I'm controlling the animation of the clones with the plane effector, the plane effector's linear field. So wherever the field passes, that's where the animation, like it plays the animation basically. So if I should, I've set keyframe. So if I play, you can see wherever it passes, then it animates it and gets back to its position. So basically, that's using the effector to control the animation. Now, I'm sure most of the things I explained is a bit clearer and you understand most of the things I talked about. But if there's anything that you don't understand or anything you want me to explain further, you can drop a comment in the comment section and I'll do all to explain a bit further. Now, before I go, I want to talk a bit about so I have this cube of clones of cube here, and I want to talk a little bit about the transform. So with the transform in here, we actually controls the positioning scale of individual clones, but it moves it together at the same time. So for instance, it's very obvious when you use the rotation. So now you can actually control the rotation of every individual clone, and same as the scale and everything. But if you come down here, we have display, and you can actually, these displays can actually help in some ways. For instance, you can set it to index, and you can see the index of every clone. So you can, it starts from 0, counts up to the last one. So now you see we have 215 clones plus 0, so it's 216 clones. It starts from 0, so 216 clones. And then you can also set it to, let's see, so with this one, for instance, the index is, for instance, you can actually, for instance, come to Mograph effector, use the formula effector, and isolate one particular clone so that you can actually move it or rotate it or scale it anyway. So now you see there's a formula in here. You can actually clear the formula and type in id equals to that's equals to and any number. So for instance, I want to control 100, the clone 100, right? I put in id is equal to 100, and I can see that clone 100 has scaled because the parameter is set to scale. So I can actually set it, take it off. But I want to, let's say, move it position or rotate it. I can actually come to where is the, so I uncheck the scale and check position, so I can move it wherever I want. Now I can rotate it, and now still can scale it as well. So with, because I know the ID now, I can select that particular one so that I can use the formula effector to affect it. So this one gives you a bit of control. You can actually control certain stuff. So the ID can be useful in that way. There is also another thing, the weight here, which can also be used in an effective way. So for instance, you can, the weight also gives every object or clone a value which you can use like to affect. So for instance, so if I should add, like, let's say Mograph random, add random effect, I can see it's affecting it random, but I don't want that. I want to check it, and I'll see the weight transform. If I set it to 100%, now you can see we have some blends of yellow, red, and a bit of orange blending and everything. So I think yellow is 100% and red is 0%, and the in-betweens and all of those things. And with this one, you can also use it to affect the your, like how your plane and other effectors affect your clone. It doesn't affect it linearly like that, but it gives it a bit of randomness because it have random value with the weight and all that. There's also the color, which is normal color of the clones and all that. Nothing special about that. And then the UV, which you can also, it's the internal UV for the clones as well. So I wanted to talk a bit about this. The next is we have the field. So this is where every every effector that you have, this is where, let me actually change the view to back to none. So this is where every effector that you apply to the clone, this is where it comes to. So for instance, if I should come and create another plane effector, because I didn't select the clone, that it didn't affect it in any way. But if I select the clone and come to effector, I can simply drag and drop the plane effector here, and I can see it has moved it up 100 centimeters on the Y, and now I can control. So that's where you drop all your effectors, and you can drop multiple effectors, and when you drop it in, you have a little bit of control in here, so it gives you the parameter that you can move it back and forth. And you can also turn it off in here. So your plane effector could be there, but you can turn it off within your cloner object. So for instance, let me add another effector. So I come here and I'll add random, right? So it automatically added because I had the clone selected. But now I can turn off the random in here and I'll bring back the plane and all that. I can, or maybe if I want the random, but I can reduce its effect a little bit, or in here without me having to go back and select the random to come and do all those processes like in here. This one is within the clone object, so you can control the effect on effects of the effector on the clone, basically. So that's basically all about the cloner object for now. Next, we'll be talking about the matrix effector, and now we talk about how matrix object and how all the effectors and everything work along with the clones and the matrix effectors and all of that. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.